I don't, Sarah stammered, flustered. No judgment, he said, raising his hands. I'm Miguel, new security. Sarah, she replied, standing quickly, adjusting her uniform. I should go. You don't have to, Miguel said, nodding toward the piano. Play something. Sarah shook her head. I don't really play. Miguel raised an eyebrow skeptically. Your hands tell a different story. Sarah looked down, her fingers naturally curled, ready to strike invisible notes. I never had real lessons, she murmured, gathering her cleaning supplies. Besides, pianos like these aren't meant for people like me. Miguel tilted his head thoughtfully. And what kind of people are you? The question lingered, sharp and tender. Sarah had no answer that didn't taste like resignation. You know, Miguel continued, the Steinberg competition has a wild card spot. One slot for an unknown. They're auditioning tomorrow morning. Sarah laughed, the sound bouncing off the empty hall. Sure, I'll walk in there in my janitor's uniform and compete with people groomed since birth. Why not? Miguel said softly, yet earnestly. What's the worst that could happen? Humiliation, ridicule, the cruel confirmation of everything she believed about herself. Or, Miguel countered, the opposite. That night, walking home to her small Queens apartment, Miguel's words stayed with her, looping like a stubborn melody. Outside her building, she checked her mailbox. Among bills and junk was a glossy pamphlet, likely stuffed there by mistake. An ad for the Steinberg competition, featuring polished faces of past winners. They looked assured, accomplished, belonging to a world Sarah only glimpsed through windows she cleaned. Yet as she climbed the steps to her door, her fingers tapped an invisible sonata on the rail. The next morning, Sarah stayed late after her shift, watching the audition committee arrange the recital hall. Contestants for the wild card spot arrived, dressed in tailored outfits, clutching leather portfolios. They spoke confidently about conservatories and international contests. Sarah, still in her gray uniform, shrunk back against the wall. Miguel appeared beside her, his security uniform neatly pressed. Sarah shook her head. I'm just watching. The sign-up sheet's over there, he said, nodding toward a table, where a stern woman with steel gray hair checked names against a list. Last chance. They're only accepting the first 20 applicants. I don't have anything prepared. I don't have sheet music. I don't even own clothes that don't smell like cleaning supplies. Sarah's protests tumbled out. Miguel pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, a registration form. I grabbed one earlier, he said. Look, Miguel interrupted gently. I heard you yesterday. You didn't know I was there, but I listened. When you thought the room was empty. Sarah flushed. You were spying on me? I was doing my rounds, Miguel replied. And what I heard. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Sarah, I've worked here 5 years. I've heard students who've practiced their entire lives. What you played, it wasn't polished. He corrected himself. It was real. Like you were having a conversation with the piano. A chime echoed, signaling auditions would start in 5 minutes. Sarah's heart raced as Miguel pressed the form into her hand. You don't have to do this, he said. But I think you'll regret it if you don't. Before Sarah could answer, a stir near the entrance grabbed everyone's attention. A distinguished group entered, led by an elderly woman, with immaculate white hair, pearl earrings, and a tailored beige jacket. Even Sarah recognized her. Eleanor Whitmore, the legendary pianist, who had graced the world's greatest stages, now the competition's chief judge. Committee members swirled around her, nodding eagerly, laughing at her remarks. Sarah watched as Eleanor's sharp gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on the cleaning cart Sarah had abandoned. Last call for wildcard auditions. The woman at the registration desk announced. Something tightened inside Sarah's chest. Not quite courage, but perhaps its quieter cousin, defiance. Defiance against the years of believing that music wasn't meant for people like her. That dreams were luxuries she couldn't afford. Here, Sarah said, stepping up and sliding the form forward. I'd like to audition. The woman looked up, her eyes flickering briefly at Sarah's uniform, before smoothing into a neutral expression. Name? Sarah Miller. And your piece? Sarah hesitated. It's an original. Something I wrote. An eyebrow lifted. The committee usually expects classical selections. It's all I have, Sarah said simply. The woman sighed and made a note on her clipboard. Very well. You'll be last. Wait over there with the others. Sarah joined the group of contestants, painfully aware of how much she stood out. Some stared openly, others whispered behind cupped hands. A young man in a sharp suit sneered. I think you're in the wrong room, he called, his voice loud enough to carry. Custodial services are down the hall. A few others chuckled, but Sarah kept her eyes locked on the audition room door, silently counting down the minutes. This would either be the most humiliating moment of her life, or something she didn't dare imagine. Hope, for people like her, was a dangerous thing. Contestants trickled out of the hall, some grinning, others blinking back tears. Sarah stayed in her corner, unnoticed, watching as the smug young man from earlier emerged, beaming. The committee was very impressed, he bragged loudly. Ms. Whitmore herself said my Chopin had exceptional emotional depth. Sarah's stomach clenched. She had heard him through the door. Perfect technique but empty, mechanical. If that was what the judges wanted. Sarah Miller, the assistant called. The tone sharp, as if she had repeated it more than once. Heart hammering, Sarah rose on shaking legs and entered the audition room. 3 judges sat behind a long table. A middle-aged man with tiny spectacles, a younger woman with a severe bun, and at the center, Eleanor Whitmore herself. Behind them, scattered members of the faculty, former contestants, and competition staff looked on. Ms. Miller, Eleanor said, peering at her notes. It says here you'll perform an original piece. Yes, Sarah replied. Eleanor's perfectly arched eyebrows lifted. And your musical background? Sarah hesitated. I'm self-taught. A low murmur swept the audience. The younger judge leaned in, whispering to Eleanor, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I see, Eleanor said, her voice tinged with amusement. And you work here at the academy? Heat flooded Sarah's face. I'm on the cleaning staff, she answered. Whispers rippled through the room, less subtle now. Sarah caught snatches of conversation. Is this a joke? Such a waste of time. Eleanor studied Sarah for a long moment, then gestured toward the grand piano at the center of the room. Well, Ms. Miller, please proceed. Sarah walked to the instrument, its polished surface reflecting the overhead lights like a mirror. This was the Academy's pride. A concert grand, used only for the most prestigious performances. She sat at the bench, adjusting herself, aware of the dozens of eyes fixed on her, waiting for failure. As Sarah raised her hands, Eleanor cleared her throat. Actually, Ms. Miller, she said, her voice syrupy with feigned concern. Perhaps this piano isn't quite right for your audition. The male judge frowned. Eleanor. But Eleanor continued. I believe there's another piano that might suit you better. She pointed to the far corner, where an old upright stood. Its wood dulled by age. That one hasn't been tuned for the competition, but it would be more forgiving for an amateur performance. The implication hung in the air. Eleanor didn't believe Sarah worthy of the grand piano. Sarah felt the eyes on her, expecting embarrassment or anger. Instead, she stood calmly and walked to the upright piano. She played far worse instruments growing up. Out-of-tune pianos in community centers, electronic keyboards with missing keys. The bench creaked as she settled down, examining the floors up close. Chipped keys, worn pedals, and a faded fallboard. Sarah pressed middle C, wincing at the slightly flat tone. This piano wasn't just old. It had been deliberately neglected. I'm afraid it hasn't been serviced in quite some time. Eleanor said, not hiding her smirk. If it's too difficult, you're welcome to withdraw your application. The younger judge shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should. No, Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. This piano is fine. Eleanor's smile tightened. As you wish. Whenever you're ready. Sarah placed her hands on the keys, feeling the uneven resistance of each note beneath her fingers. In the silence of the room, faint snickering echoed from the back row. She closed her eyes, shutting out the judgmental stares and knowing smiles. For a moment, she was back in that Brooklyn jazz club, a child discovering music for the first time, before life had taught her to doubt herself. She took a deep breath and began to play. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment. Then she pressed down, the first few notes emerging hesitantly, slightly muffled by the piano's worn hammers. Someone in the audience stifled a laugh. But Sarah didn't stop. Her left hand found a rhythm, steady and sure, while her right hand began to weave a simple melody. The old piano responded grudgingly, its voice raspy with age and neglect. But even through its imperfections, the music commanded attention. Eleanor's perfectly composed expression faltered. Her expectations shattered. This wasn't the fumbling, amateur performance she had anticipated. The melody grew more complex. Sarah's hands moving with growing confidence. Interesting approach, Eleanor said loudly, breaking the spell. But perhaps something more conventional would better show your skills. A Chopin etude, perhaps. Sarah paused, her fingers still resting on the keys. The interruption was deliberate, a tactic to throw her off balance. I don't play Chopin, Sarah answered quietly. No? Not even a simple waltz? Eleanor's tone dripped with sweet poison. Surely anyone claiming to be a pianist can manage that. The male judge shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor, we should let her continue. I'm merely suggesting that Ms. Miller demonstrate some proficiency with established repertoire. Eleanor interrupted. Anyone can improvise random notes. Her words were a slap. The energy in the room shifted as several audience members nodded in agreement. Perhaps. Eleanor continued, rising from her seat and walking toward the old piano. I can demonstrate what we're looking for. She gestured for Sarah to move, like a queen dismissing a servant. Sarah stood, her legs stiff, as Eleanor took her place at the bench, adjusting it with a look of disdain. This instrument is rather challenging, Eleanor said to the audience, playing a quick scale that revealed the piano's uneven tuning. But a true musician adapts. She added, before launching into a Chopin nocturne, her technique flawless despite the piano's faults. The message was clear. Even on this inferior instrument, a real pianist could produce beauty. Eleanor played for a while, eyes closed, lost in the music, fingers still tingling from the sensation of the keys. I'm self-taught, she said softly, her voice gaining strength. The question seemed to hang in the air, as if the audience was waiting for something more. But you, how is that possible? The voice came again, from the front row. A woman with glasses who had been watching intently. Sarah hesitated, looking down at the piano in front of her. Its worn wood and aged keys. I didn't have the chance to learn in a formal setting, she said slowly, but music has always been in my life. It's been my way of understanding the world, of finding things I couldn't express in words. The audience absorbed her words in silence, the weight of the moment lingering in the air. Sarah looked at Eleanor, who was still seated, her hands clenched tight in her lap. The older woman's eyes were locked on her, a mixture of disbelief and something colder. But Sarah didn't look away. She had nothing left to prove. The male judge spoke again, his voice measured but filled with awe. Ms. Miller, what you just played was unlike anything we've heard here. He paused for a long moment, before continuing. Your understanding of music transcends the boundaries of training. You played with a depth that most musicians spend years trying to achieve. That is something rare. The younger female judge nodded, her eyes bright with admiration. Your piece, she said, it felt like a conversation between the music and you. It was alive. Sarah gave a small nod in response, unsure what else to say. The applause began to fade slowly, but it was clear that what she had done had changed something in that room. Even those who had doubted her, who had looked at her with disdain or amusement, were now silent, caught up in the unexpected beauty of her performance. Eleanor's lips pressed tightly together, but Sarah could see the faintest crack in her facade. The competition had been transformed, not by a polished, perfectly rehearsed piece, but by something raw and honest. For the first time, it felt like the music itself had spoken louder than anything else. A long, lingering silence followed her performance, before the male judge turned to the others. I believe we've seen enough. We will be in touch with the results shortly, Ms. Miller. The tone of his voice had shifted, from the detached professionalism of earlier to one of respect. Sarah stood quietly, still overwhelmed by the experience, as the room began to buzz with conversation once again. It was clear she had made her mark. Sarah stood at the center of it all, her heart racing but with a sense of calm settling over her. The applause still rang in her ears, but it was no longer just about the crowd or the judges. It was about something deeper, something she had finally allowed herself to acknowledge. She had always doubted that the world would ever take her seriously, but now, as she stood in the midst of her unexpected triumph, The weight of years of silence and self-doubt felt like it was lifting. Her hands, once so ashamed of their calluses and rough edges, now held the kind of power she had only dreamed of. Elena's gesture, the subtle respect in her eyes, meant something profound. It wasn't just a victory for Sarah. It was a win for every underdog. For every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. And as Sarah took that handshake, she realized that this moment had changed her in ways she hadn't fully understood. The world of classical music, a world that had seemed so far out of reach, was now hers to navigate. Miguel's smile across the room made her feel like she had something real. A connection to someone who had believed in her when no one else had. He had always seen something in her, even when she had barely seen it in herself. His thumbs up was a silent affirmation of all the hard work, the hours spent practicing on whatever instrument she could find. The validation, while sweet, felt secondary. What mattered was that she was no longer hidden in the shadows of her own fears. Now, Sarah's journey would continue. No longer as a cleaning woman, but as a wildcard finalist in a prestigious competition. And who knew what else was possible after that? Perhaps this was only the beginning of a path she never expected to walk. As the reporters gathered around, and the excitement swelled, Sarah felt her resolve strengthen. There would always be doubters. There would always be people who thought they knew better. But now, she knew the truth. It wasn't about what people thought of her. It was about what she could do. And she would never again be afraid to show it.